So today we'll be studying the first unit, and we're going to call it Numeracy Review. There are going to be 8 lessons that we'll have for this unit, and eventually we'll have 7 lessons for the unit. We have lesson 1, which is integers. The next one is rational numbers. The next one is solving equations, polynomial equations, graphing review. Then we're going to do some linear graphing skills. Then we're going to take a look at graphing linear relations. Then we're going to take a look at slope and equations of lines. And we'll also take a look at the final review. Now, your testing will be on September 18th, period 1 or period 2. So one of the things that we're going to be studying today is all about integers. And what we're going to be studying is the adding and subtracting of integers, and also rules for multiplying and dividing integers. And we'll also take a look at BEDMAS for integers. Now, how do you know we're going to understand what we're doing today? You can add, subtract, divide, and multiply using binary operations. Now, let's go and talk about that, and I want you to add this to your jargon note that we discussed in class earlier. So when we talk about binary operations, we're talking about something that means this. We're really talking about the concept of having 2 numbers combined with some form of operation, and those operations could be plus, minus, times, divide, and exponentiation. So for the beginning of today's lessons, make sure you insert today's date in the top corner of your page that I handed out. And what we're going to do is, the first thing we're going to do is add and subtract using integers, but more specifically we're going to add and subtract with brackets. The key concept for this part of the lesson is to remember that when we have something that has a plus and a minus with a bracket involved, if there are a plus outside the bracket and a plus inside the bracket, we're going to be making sure that we have plus replacing it. In this case, if we have the idea of the same signs for 2, we must change it to a plus. If we have different signs, we must change whatever the result is to be a minus. So now when we look at 6 plus bracket plus 10, we write the following. Now the question is, we have 6 and we have 10. Because we have a plus outside the bracket and then a plus inside the bracket, we just need to replace what we've got with a plus. And we end up with the following. And now remember, every time we come up with our final solution, give some sort of indication by creating a box. So now we have -5, and if you take a look, we have plus and -2 inside our bracket. So that's going to give us a minus sign to work with. And then we end up with 2. So -5 minus 2 is going to be -7. And we're good to go. Now let's go again. So now we have -7, and you try, and you should realize that negative plus becomes minus, and 3. So -7 minus 3 gives us -10, and as usual, identify your box. And we have this for the following problem. Now you'll notice that for the last problem that we have here, we have minus and minus. And so that turns into plus, so 4 plus 8 gives us 12. So the big idea for today, for that first part, was the addition of a positive number and the subtraction of a negative number simplifies to basically a positive or addition operation. Now, the addition of a negative number and the subtraction of a positive number simplifies a negative or minus operation. Now, please make a correction to your sheets. This should say 2. The final part of this document, I want you to make sure you add this to your big idea. Basically what I want you to do is I want you to pause the video. I want you to look at each of these A and B digits or integers, and what I want you to tell me is whether it's A plus B or A minus B for each. Pause now and then do the problems, and then I'll show you the solutions. So now A plus B gives us this version. A plus bracket negative B gives us minus. A minus plus B gives us minus. A minus minus B gives us plus. Now let's move on to the next. So now we'll increase the complexity by doing this several times in one math problem. So let's go. As you're doing addition and subtraction, what I want you to do is I want you to add the left two numbers that are going to be added or subtracted. So in this case we've got minus 9 plus 5 plus 2. We go again, minus 9 plus 5 gives us negative 4 plus 2, and then finally we end up with negative 2. As usual, circle your solution. Now I want you to pause the video and do the next problem following the same pattern we followed in part A. Here we go. And you should get the following solution. You'll notice that each time I always combine the first two values on the left, and I keep following that pattern until everything collapses. So for multiplying and dividing, we follow the same pattern. So if we do this, we're going to say if we have the same signs, we use a plus. If we have different signs, we use a minus. For this first problem, we have positive 4, and then we know that because we have a bracket, two bracketed expressions, there's a times in between. So that means we end up with, well, in this case, we've got positive 24, which just simplifies to 24. We're only going to do this for this problem where we show whether it's positive or negative and then simplify if necessary. Alright, so now we'll simplify the double signs for the next problem, and you'll notice that this is 20. It really means positive 20. Positive 20 divided by negative 10. What do you get? You're going to get, well, just negative 2. Okay, next problem, we have the following. I'm going to reintroduce you to cancellation before we move on. So taking a look at 20 over 6, anytime you have a fraction, find the largest number that can divide both of these numbers, negative 120 and 6. In this case, we take negative 120 and divide by 6, and so you're going to get negative 20. And also divide your 6 by 6, you also get 1. So the final problem is going to be just negative 20 over 1, which just ends up being 20, negative 20. Alright, pause the video, do the final one. So in this case, your value is going to be positive, and then 8 times 2 gives 16. So our final answer is positive 16. Big idea for multiplication is that when we have a multiplication, right, and the quotient division of two numbers, if the same signs comes up, we end up with a positive result. Now, if we have the product and the quotient of two numbers with different signs, then we're going to end up with a negative result. Now, let's simplify the chart below. Make sure it's in your note. Plus A times plus B gives us, well, just AB, which is positive AB. The next one, plus A times negative B gives us minus AB. Now, minus A times plus B gives us minus AB. Minus A times minus B gives us positive AB. And the same can be said about the chart below with division. So if you think about this, when we take a look at the final blue question at the bottom, how do these rules compare to simplifying the double sign when adding or subtracting? Well, they're just identical. They're the same concept for just the sign. Take a moment and evaluate this problem, and then I'm going to put a quick note as a concept for later. Notice we have to apply the rules for multiplication again, but this time what I want you to recognize is if we have an even number of negatives, then the overall result is positive. So our final answer is going to be, well, it's going to be positive, and then we just multiply 2 times 10 times 5 times 8 times 3 times 1, which ends up being, well, 2400. And now let's do the next problem. We have a mixture of multiplication and division. Now the same rules apply. Is this positive or is it negative? Take a look. All right, there you go. Let's see if your hypothesis was right. This is positive. And then we'll just follow the same patterns as before. Multiply through. Well, 5 times negative 12 gives us, well, negative 60. I'm going to leave that in brackets. So when I do one binary operation, put your result in a bracket so that you remember what your sign is. Divided by 3 times negative 2. So negative 60 divided by 3 is going to be negative 20. And then we're going to times that by negative 2, which is going to be negative 40. There we go. So now we'll do a quick review of BEDMAS. You know that BEDMAS stands for all these things. Make sure you fill those out. I'll give you 5 seconds and we'll move on. You'll notice that with BEDMAS, we literally just go through all of those concepts in order. So the first one we're going to do is we're going to do all of these problems, and you'll notice that we're going to have to follow BEDMAS. So I'm going to zoom in on each problem and we'll write them out. Here we go. So now we have 5 times bracket 7 minus 10. And you'll notice that we have a complex of brackets right here. So the first thing that we have to do is we're going to go and simplify as much as we can. There we go, just make this a little thicker. And so now we'll start by writing 5, and then we're going to times that by bracket. Well, 7 minus 10 is negative 3. And final answer is 5 times negative 3 is negative 15. Now let's go take a look at this next problem. So we have negative 3 squared. I want you to imagine the square is being applied to the number directly beside it. So in essence, I want you to imagine that there's a box around everything except the minus sign that's there. So really, this problem can be looked upon as minus 1, and then we're going to have a bracket of 3 squared. And when you calculate that, it's going to be negative 1 times, well, 3 squared is 9. Notice how I'm leaving my result in a bracket and then pulling the information together. So now we have negative 9. I expect you to do the same. So now let's take a look at this one. So this next problem that we have here actually has an exponent, and it's being applied to the entire quantity, negative 3. So the only time we apply the minus sign is when the minus sign is actually attached to the bracket that the exponent is working upon. So now this problem, minus 3 all raised to the power 2 in brackets is just minus 3 times minus 3 simplified, which is just 9, which is what we expect. So remember, if the number is not in a bracket, then the overall sign will be negative for your final answer, for your exponent. So now, the next problem, we have to follow a few patterns, and you'll notice that we have to identify what we're going to start with. If you look at this problem here, this is the bracket because we're using BEDMAS. So inside this bracket, we've got our minus 1 and 1, and then we have our exponent that we'll have to work on. Alright, so let's go and write out the solution. So we're just going to leave 10, and we're going to do minus 2, and then we're going to times it by the result of what? Well, negative 1 and 1 is 1, but now, if you take a look over here, we have an exponent. So plus, well, 4 squared is going to be 16. So now, let's simplify. 10 minus 2. So you'll notice that this complex needs to be simplified, so this ends up being times 17, which is equal to 10 minus 34, which is negative 24 for your final answer. All right. On to the last two problems. For this next problem, we're going to have to do this entire highlighted set of text because it's in a bracket. And what we're going to do is we're going to simplify that as best we can using our double sign rules. So we can look at the top half of our fraction as a bracket, so we do all our operations, and we do the same for the bottom. So they can be done at different times. So right now I'm going to leave the minus 2 out front. We're going to times it by the quantity. Well, let's simplify the double brackets on the inside. So we got a minus 2, we got a minus 5 now, and then we've got a plus 1 inside the bracket. Now underneath we have 48 divided by negative 4, which simplifies to negative 12. So now let's continue. The next thing we have to do is we're going to have to go and take a look at this part right here. The 2, the 5, and the 1. Let's simplify the whole thing in one shot. So the top becomes negative 2 times. Notice how when I have my final result of what's in the bracket, I leave it in a bracket. So I have negative 6. And then we're still dividing by negative 12. So on the top we have positive 12 because we have negative 2 times negative 6, and we're dividing by negative 12, which gives us negative 1 as our final answer. Moving on, now we have this problem, a plus bc divided by ad squared. Any variables sitting beside each other are just going to be multiplication. When we do our substitution, make sure that you put any numbers that you replace with a bracket. So let's do that. So now we have, well, A is 4, so we're going to have 4 plus, well, B is -6, C is 2, divided by, well, A is 4 again, D squared is -1. Now remember BEDMAS. If you look at this problem, what we have to do to start on the top portion of our fraction is we're gonna have to simplify the multiplication of -6 and 2. So now what we're gonna get is 4, well, plus -6 times 2 is -12, divided by, now on the bottom, now let's simplify. If you look at it, it's 4 times the exponent of -1. So let's simplify that. So we're going to have 4 times -1. Now let's get rid of our double bracket. Well, there's nothing for the 4 minus 12 divided by, well, 4 times -1 is -4. And now 4 minus 12 is -8 divided by -4, which gives us -2 as our final answer.